Welcome everyone. As Hannah was saying, this is a members event, so welcome to all our members. I just think it's a really great opportunity for those of us who work in the offices across Australia to just talk a bit about what's going on in our offices. And for me, that's been over one of the projects we've been working on in South Australia for the last year or two has been a project around describing and digitising photographs relating to the Commonwealth Railways. So that's what I'll be talking to you about today. Um, just I'd also like to acknowledge that acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we all are joining today. For me, that's Ghana country. I'm talking to you from Ghana country in Adelaide, and I pay my respects to their elders, past and present. So on to photographs. Um, Now we call this talk more than locomotives, but of course I do have to admit that we have lots of locomotives in this collection as well. And I know lots of people are interested in this aspect of railways. So lots to discover relating to locomotives and railway equipment in the collection. So that's certainly there. So you can trace the sort of evolution of locos from the sort of early 20th century, which steam locomotives, through to once diesel locomotives came in the sort of 1950s, 40s, 50s. So that's certainly there. I suppose the thing that's sort of that strikes us from having worked with these photographs for a long time is how much more there is, how many more interests, I suppose, can be satisfied in terms of what you get out of these photographs. So there's they depict a wide range of subject matters. One of the things I think that strikes us is that they often depict forms of transport have nothing to do with railways, apparently. So lots of sort of vintage cars in the collection, and sort of from the 1910s, 1920s. You'll find lots of camels, certainly certainly present in many of these photographs. And in some cases, the railways may not have even been built when these photographs were taken. Sort of, I suppose, scoping or visiting areas. So the photographs created by the Commonwealth Railways, rather, or for them, rather than necessarily always depicting the railways themselves. So that's the line sort of we're taking with this talk. The photographs are interesting because they depict, in many ways, they sort of document the lives of those who worked on the line, who lived on the line, and travelled on the line. Just to give you a quick idea of what we'll talk about today. So I know certainly there are lots of people who are very passionate and a lot more knowledgeable about railways than I am. So bear with me. This won't be a detailed history of the railways in Australia, but I will provide a bit of background first up to why, really just explaining why we have these records in the National Archives collection, and what they cover. As I say, this is a project we've been working on for a while, both in South Australia and across the National Archives. So I'm going to give you some background to that digitisation project, how it came about. Won't have a lot of time to talk about how we searched for these records in the catalogue, but one of the main objectives, I suppose, is just to raise awareness about these records, how they're now available or more accessible. So I will just give you a few pointers to how you can access these yourself. And then I'll give you a bit of an overview of the key themes and stories we've identified collection. Hopefully, if I keep it reasonably to time, we'll have time for questions at the end. So just looking at that background, so I've mentioned already several times Commonwealth Railways. the Commonwealth Railways was actually an agency of the Commonwealth. Um, so this is quite specific. It was created in 1917, Commonwealth Railways, by the Commonwealth Rails Act, for the purpose of managing all the railways and properties and monies appropriated by the federal Parliament relating to railways. The Railway Commissioner's Office was located in Melbourne during this time until 1975, but the operations centre was situated in Port Augusta in South Australia. And many of the senior operational positions over the years, which were originally located in Melbourne, were transferred to Port Augusta during this time. So there's always been a strong South Australian role in the operation of the Commonwealth Railways, and for obvious reasons in terms of its location as well, pretty central to the railways that I'm going to talk about today. And that's why we had these records in not just the National Archives, but in the South Australian Office of the National Archives. And I suppose that's why much of my focus will be on that essay content. So just forgive me for indulge me in terms of that. There's certainly a strong WA and Northern Territory sort of aspect to these records as well, which I perhaps haven't emphasised quite as much. But that's certainly there, and they have obvious national significance in terms of the role the railways played. I suppose at the end of that period, 1975, the position of the Railway Commissioner was actually abolished, and the Australian National Railways Commission was established. So what we're looking at today really is we do have records relating to post-1975. Things became a little bit more complicated in terms of the Commonwealth's involvement in the management of railways after that point. Some of the previously state-run lines in Tasmania and South Australia passed to the Commonwealth after 1975. The Australian National Railways Commission actually operated out of Adelaide after that time. But over the years, the Commonwealth's involvement in actually managing how the railways operated has decreased, and much of this has been now privatised. So when we talk about the Commonwealth Railways, 1917 to 1975, we're talking really about three main lines. So we're talking about the Trans-Australian Railway, the Central Australian Railway, and the North Australian Railway. There were some other smaller operations as well that came under remit for Commonwealth Railways, including the ACT Railway, which I won't talk about too much today. I do just note, and this will be the same in other states as well across Australia. In South Australia, there was also the South Australian Railways, which operated between 1854 and 1978. And so many of the records, many of the railways in South Australia were created and then managed by South Australian Railways. So, as I say, I'm just covering the lines that I mentioned above there. So you may well find, if you're interested in other railways, that you'll need to go to your state archives. Just a bit of background about the Trans-Australian Railway. That's sort of, in many ways, the focus of this talk. The building of the Trans-Australian Railway was a significant event in the early history of Australia. It was actually the promise of having this railway system to the east that persuaded the colony of Western Australia to join the Commonwealth to start with. Still took a lot of lobbying by WA to make this promise come true. So it wasn't until 1908 that WA and South Australia undertook a full survey through the desert to establish where this line would run. But in 1911, a new Railway Act was passed, and in 1912, in September 1912, the Governor-General Lord Denman turned the sod at the ceremony that opened construction of the line at the eastern end in Port Augusta. Similar ceremony was held just a bit later in Kalgoorlie. So they started work in 1912, both at East in Kalgoorlie, sorry, in Port Augusta, and in the West in Kalgoorlie, and they finally met. The line finally met in Nordea in South Australia in October 1917. It was the first major infrastructure project to be undertaken following federation. So it was really a significant, had significant economic and social impact on Australian society. Made obviously connecting over huge distances a lot easier than it was before the railway existed. Um, there were so that at that point, 1917, the line ran between Port Augusta and Kalgoorlie, was extended as these photos show. In the opening of 1937, the line was extended to Port Pirie. But at that point, still you couldn't go from, say, Perth to Sydney without changing trains, or you couldn't go all the way to Perth from Port Augusta without changing trains, and that was because of the differences in gauge between the railways. You'd have to change train in Kalgoorlie. In 1969, 1970, those issues were overcome, and in 1970 you could actually travel all the way from Sydney to Perth. And we now know that train as the Indian Pacific, but no longer run by the Commonwealth. It's actually the longest section, as this photograph not only shows but says, the longest section of straight line railway in the world, 309 miles across the Nullarbor Plain. Just looking at the other railways that the photographs cover, the Central Australian Railway was actually constructed earlier and by the South Australian Railways. Had several names over the years, was called the Port Augusta to Unadata Line or the Great Northern Railway. And initially the line extended from Port Augusta to Farina in 1882. Probably can't make out too much detail in that plan that I've got up on the screen, but that's from this early stage of the line from 1882. It shows the track in Farina, and some of these records. So these records, we have them in our collection because in 1911, management of the line was passed to the Commonwealth government. In recent years, these plans actually we've got have been used as part of the Farina restoration project, just to recreate. Farina for many years was essentially or is a ghost town, but these plans have been used in work that's been going on up there to sort of recreate what the town was like back in the 1880s. So the Central Australian Railway was actually continued to be run by South Australian Railways until 1926, when the Commonwealth actually took over running it, renamed it the Central Australian Railway, and commenced building the extension of the line to Alice Springs, which was completed in 1929. And various over the years changes to this line. There's a great set of photographs we've got in the collection of the opening of a new section of standard gauge line, which was an improvement on the previous line from Stirling North near Port Augusta to Maree in 1957. As I say, a great collection of photographs we've got in terms of depicting the people in Maree who came out for the opening of this line, and Thomas Playford, the Premier of South Australia, was there. Arthur Fadden from the Commonwealth. And so that was one of the changes there. There was always this dream of having that line that would run from north to south, south to north, from Adelaide to Darwin. But this, as we know, didn't actually happen until 2004. The Central Australian Railway was part of that sort of dream, but it was actually superseded in 1980 with another line, a couple of 100 kilometres to the west, that ran from Tarcoola to Alice Springs. So the Central Australian Railway really now only exists as part of a tourist railway called the Pixie Tourist Railway. And then finally, the North Australia Railway. This was known as the Pine Creek line, and was also constructed by the South Australian government and opened in 1889. 1917 was extended to Catherine, and then by 1929 got the furthest point south, just south of Larrimah in Burdon. So the management of this line was also taken over by the Commonwealth in 1918 and became known as the North Australian Railway in 1926. So we've got photographs in the National Archives collection, all relating to all those lines. And the reason we've got that is the Commonwealth either built those lines or took over management from South Australia in the early 20th century. Just want to just give you a bit of context of what this project that has now made these available digitally, how it came about, and the sort of context for it. So in 2021, the National Archives received an additional money to the tune of $67 million over 4 years. That's additional to our normal operating budget, and that became part of what we call the Defend the Past, Protect the Future program. And much of that funding has gone towards digitisation. That's certainly what you know, our members, our audience, our stakeholders have told us they want a lot more digital material available online. But there was also a very a significant preservation reason for doing this. So with much of the digitization that has come out of that funding has been targeting at-risk records, such as photographs and AV material. So records that are, because of their age or format, are particularly vulnerable to loss. So that's this project to digitize the railway photographs fits within that category. There was also, as part of the project, as part of the funding, there was also a sort of project to consolidate storage across Australia. So we're looking at reducing the amount of repositories we have across the country. Very expensive to pay for all that storage. So the aim is to consolidate, to reduce the amount of facilities we have storing records, and to spend the savings on more improving the conditions in which that material is stored in. And South Australia's collection was relocated in 2021, so we were the first state affected by that. So that also included the photographs that I'm talking about. So at the same time, so we've moved this material into Canberra in most cases, but we did make a promise before they moved that we would itemize them, we would describe these photographs, so that the fact that they've moved out of the state is not a hindrance to people being able to access them. And so what we did is we described and repackaged these photographs, which have been in South Australia for many, many years, probably not accessed as much as they could have been, partly because they hadn't been described, so they weren't that easy to find on the system. And then they were also, so not only were they not easy to find, but you would have to come in and actually go through boxes of photographs or albums looking for what you were interested in. So significant benefit there from the amount of work we did in South Australia to first describe each photograph. Is now on the system, now on record search, so people can search for it. They all have titles, not always that extensive in terms of what's contained in the titles. We're very much dependent on the sort of metadata that we get from the agency. Many of these photographs, as I say, were just in envelopes or in boxes without too much detail. So that's we're hoping as we make these more available, we may get more information about what's contained in these photographs in terms of people and places and dates. But certainly a lot easier for people to access now that they're described. We also repackaged them into albums, into plastic sleeves, just to ensure long-term preservation and so that to ensure they didn't get damaged as part of the digitization process as well. Once we'd done that, we actually sent these to, so this is very much a project that involved several offices across the National Archives. We actually sent them to our office in Victoria, and our colleagues there organised for those the photographs. They have expertise in terms of digitisation and preservation down there, so they did additional work that was needed to be done, and then they sent them they sent them to our outsourced partner to get them digitized. So that work's mainly been done now. Still a little bit of work to load some of what's been digitized onto the system, but by and large, the project is now complete. I should say, as I said, there's Defend the Past, Protect the Future program involves many records across the archives, and not just photographs, but I should also say they're not just railway photographs either. All of South Australians' photographs are currently being digitised, South Australia's photographs. That just gives you an idea of some of the other subjects that we're also looking at. In terms of railways, so this is basically just, I suppose, just a summary of some of the series. Those of you who will be more familiar with how the archives are organised and have used the collection and the catalogue before will understand perhaps a bit about how we organise the archives. We do so around groups of record called series. So it can be helpful to know these series numbers when you go to search. So that's a list of some of the most significant ones in terms of the photographic series. The first one, perhaps my favourite of the series, they're actually physical, they're photograph albums that were created by the Commonwealth Railways. Most of them, although it goes up to 1960, most of them are significantly older than that. And they have a real sort of, it's interesting, I suppose, the whole sort of digital, physical sort of dichotomy, I suppose, between whether people prefer to look at the originals in some cases. Obviously, having them digitized makes them much more accessible. I'd say that series is certainly more accessible now it's digitized, but is one of those series that you really like to actually handle and look at in terms of those original objects. The rest of the series tend to be just prints and negatives, so less of a sort of sense of sort of archival objects in themselves. And in fact, in many cases, you'll find copies or versions of similar photographs across some of these series. So you'll often find many entries relating to the same, if not the same photograph, the same sort of set of photographs across these series. They're not, you can see from the titles, I mean, a couple of them mention Trans-Australian Railway, so that gives you a sense that those are dedicated to that particular railway. But in many cases, these series really cover the full range of subjects. There's not always a clear sense of why they were created, so different parts of the Commonwealth Railways organisation were just collecting these photographs, perhaps for different reasons. While I'm talking about railway records, I also should mention, although we're focusing on photographs, we do have a lot of records that are non-photographic that, if you're interested in railways, I should point out to you. There's quite a few correspondence files. B300, for instance, is an example. So quite often very large files, as you'd expect. Lots of it's just sort of transactional correspondence about various subject matters, but you do get a sense from these files about the sort of I suppose the creation of, for instance, the Trans-Australian Railway and things like the maintenance of stations and various community activities along the line that involve the Commonwealth Railways. We've got employee records in some cases. This is a bit patchy, but we have got that series MP992/4 is actually fully digitized, so that gives you access to some staff cards from that period. We've got and then we've got various sort of publications and commemorative material. A visual sense of some of these. This is from a correspondence file. Some menus. This is a menu from 1941, Christmas Day. So you can see what people were eating as they went across the Nullarbor on Christmas Day. This is an example of staff cards I was just talking about. So just basic details about where people were stationed, if you like, and their role, what they did, and in some cases some of the disciplinary issues that that needed to be recorded. But you do get family details as well sometimes on these cards. It's just one of the items in our sort of commemorative publication series, and plans as well. So I said, we started off by saying these photographs contain more than locomotives. These plans are mainly to do with locomotives or equipment. So this is for an axle box on Port Augusta to Unadata Railway, but lots and lots of plans as well. So that just gives you a background to how these have come about, how the fact that these have now largely been digitized, why that has happened, and the work that we've been doing. Mike just also say, I did say I have got limited time to show you how to go about searching. So, and quite often people have different, some people will be very experienced at searching the catalogue, other people will have not used it before. So I won't, and my colleague, thank you, Emily, has just added a couple of links, I think, into the chat. So just to give you a bit more information, some of this you can get on our website itself as well, but just to give you a bit of information about how to use record search. So you can see on our homepage on the website, there's a direct link to record search. So, and that's basically where all our how we manage our collection, how we make it accessible to you. So I'm not going to give you a step-by-step. There's just a few screenshots just to give you an idea. I suppose the aim here really is just to demonstrate how, although there are complexities to searching and you may well need some assistance, it's reasonably easy for you now just to go away after this, for instance, and just go to the catalogue and do a bit of searching yourself and access some of the material I'm talking about. So we've got two options actually with the records I'm talking about. We can do a search of record search, or we can use something we call photo search, which is also on the tab here. And that offers certain benefits when you're just searching for photos. So I'll just show you both of those options. With record search, you can see this is how we organize the system. You can search by agencies. So, potentially you could search for all the records relating to the Commonwealth Railways. You can narrow it down to those groups of records that are called series. We call series, or you can just search by item, which is what most of us would do. So we'd be looking for just show me everything, all the photos on a certain keyword, for instance. So I did list some of the series before. This is just an example. If you put in B3114, which is that series of photographic albums, into the series search, then you'll just get a bit more information about it. And you can, it will have links to other series. It will tell you who created the series, what's in it, and some of the date ranges. It also allows you can see the number of items there, over 2,500 items. So it allows you just to click on that and actually see everything within that series. And then you might, if you've got the time, you might just want to browse through all of those looking for something of interest. So just to go back to this, the other option which most of us would take would be just to search by items. Now with record search is the whole catalogue. So if you just put in a place name from the Trans-Australian Railway, you, and with no other information, you'll get everything in our collection that relates to that place. Most of these are not photographs. They're, as you can see, they cover various aspects, like for instance, the station at Bookaloo. They all relate to railways in that way, but perhaps not what we're looking for today. You can see on some of these columns, it will tell you where the records are, it'll tell you something about their dates, and this column, digitized item, if there is an icon there, that means it's been digitized, which most of these have not. However, you could select photographs in the physical format, as well as Bookaloo, and that will narrow it down slightly. And you can do various other things as well to narrow it down. You could put dates in, although that's not always helpful. And once we've done that, you can see there's an icon of a camera. So these are actually all photographs now. So we've narrowed it down. This shows you what it looks like in record search. If it has that icon in that column, then you can click on that and actually view each of these photographs. So in this case, you click on that. That's what it looks like. You can make that larger. You can copy that. It's available online for free, so you can, within reason, do what you like with that photograph. I did not. I noticed that it's a bit of a mystery here. Is that you'll notice that Bookaloo on the photograph on the station is not spelt in the same way that my search. I spelt it in my search. I've never seen anywhere it spelt like this. So very strange that they ended up with a station that actually had this sign on it. So there must. I'd be interested to know what the explanation for that is. But the other option, when you're just dealing with photographs, which does offer quite a lot of benefits and makes it a bit easier, is just to use photo search. And that, if you click on this tab, photo search, you can just put in Bookaloo again, and it will only search photographs. You don't have to worry about filtering out all those other types of records. Just a word of warning, but it does filter out all of those. Photo search doesn't give you anything extra from record search. It's just a different interface. You can actually search by series as well using this drop down, but I've just done the search just using Bookaloo, and that is a significantly easier way if you're looking for images to browse through them. You can see the photograph of the station is 3 rows down there. And this is useful because many of these photographs have very similar titles. There's nothing really to indicate. If you're looking for a specific thing, it's not always easy to narrow it down any further without, you have to just open each one and go through them. So browsing using photo search is a great idea. And I should mention that my colleague Jeff Tulip in the South Australian office will be doing a talk on photo search in August. Now that's actually in person here in Adelaide, but we're hoping to do that as a webinar as well in the coming months. So if you're interested in finding out more about how to use photo search, look out for that. Okay, so I'm going to, for the rest of the talk, I'm just going to sort of, without too much comment or detail, I'm just going to take you through, I suppose, some of the themes and subjects we found when working with these photographs. Just to give you an idea, times this is just going to be quite a quick sort of slideshow, but I'm just hoping to give you a bit of a sense of what we've got in the collection. And I suppose starting out, I did say the sort of focus that we're taking is more than locomotives. And I mentioned that in many cases we've got photographs that are very interesting photographs of regional outback South Australia and other states that really appear to have not much to do with railways. In many ways, they're sort of expeditions that they're surveys of land where railways may be built, and that's what's depicted, and they're usually quite old parts of the collection in terms of when they were taken. So all of the next few slides are all from that series I was talking about, these photographic albums that were compiled, I suppose, as part of these expeditions. This first one's from 1920 trip to the South Australian Queensland border, and it gives you a sense, I suppose, of the remoteness of some of these expeditions. Often taken by sort of senior Commonwealth personnel or other sort of luminaries, I suppose, to visit areas, to liaise with people, communities in these areas about potential railway development. Later on, some of these trips are really about sort of annual inspections of railway land and railway operations. This one's particularly interesting, I find. So this is one of the albums. This was depicting a trip by the governor of South Australia to Central Australia in 1923. The governor was Sir Tom Bridges at the time. He was very enthusiastic about building a north-south railway to open up. Sorry, I'll just go back to open up Central Australia, I suppose, in terms of links and communication links. But first, he wanted to see the region for himself, so he assembled quite a distinguished party for a 3-week inspection by car. So 3 4-cylinder Dort touring vehicles were modified for the expedition, fitted with the largest possible tyres. They sent enough fuel for the 2,500 kilometre trip ahead by camel. So as with apparently at Alice Springs, people lined the sides of the roads to greet the party. Celebrations included a corroboree, and the official party was entertained by the town's citizens at the jail, which apparently doubled as a hall. And on the way back, they were advised that the terrain from Hermannsburg to Udnadata was unsuitable for motor vehicles, but they thought they'd give it a go anyway. And they were actually the first cars ever to travel successfully across that route. And you see, I've just included a few of the pages from this album. So they depict all of that meeting with communities and that were held, and also some of that aspect of travel that I mentioned in terms of difficulty in negotiating that terrain with in cars. So you get a good sense of that from that album. Another one, the next album in the series, was another visit by parliamentarians to Central Australia just a couple of years later. That was all about the proposed route of this north-south railway. So there was already this what became the Central Australia Railway in place to Udnadata. So some people were arguing that was the way, just extend that further towards Alice Springs. And then others favoured a route a bit further west from Kingunya, which was on the Trans-Australian line. And that actually is what happened, but many, many decades later. So this Disalva depicts, you can see from that map, and similar kind of photographs there in terms of travel into Central Australia by the party. And as I said, there's some quite good photographs as well, less sort of less involved expeditions, if you like, but visits to various points along the railway by sort of inspection tours. They were in the 1930s, for instance. We've got lots of photographs of Alan Williams, Norm Turner, and others on the road from Darwin to Tennant Creek. And you also get a sense that it hasn't become any easier to navigate some of these places in the car. So you get lots of photographs like this. Of course, the motor inspection car that was actually designed to run on the track itself was one way to overcome some of the obstacles that were found in that other photograph. And then just sort of backtracking, so very much talking now about photographs that actually depict the building of the railway. In most cases, I'm talking about the Trans-Australian Railway here. So we've got lots and lots of photographs that just show what was involved really in terms of the labour and the logistics to construct the Trans-Australian Railway between 1912 and 1917. Less in terms of construction of the Central Australian and North Australian Railway in the collection, because much of that had already been done, although lots of photos that show similar kind of extensions that were built or maintenance required in those locations. Just to give you some figures, to give you the scale of the operation in terms of a Trans-Australian, by 1916, more than 3,400 workers were employed on the line. Over a 5-year period, workers camped at the construction sites along the line, laying 2.5 million sleepers, and 140,000 tonnes of railway line were laid. As we said before, it was done in 2 parts, construction from the east and from the west, and the line eventually met at Aldea in South Australia. And just a couple of more. We've got lots and lots of photographs like this, just showing involved. Men worked in difficult conditions of isolation, extreme heat, flies, and the photographs all reflect the harsh and dry conditions that they experienced. Obviously, on the Nullarbor Plain, average daily temperatures in January would be up into the 30s, and but in July also quite cold, and problems in terms of constructions was the absence of running water and the lack of the infrastructure, as no towns existed along the proposed route at that point. So all food and supplies were sent from the Port Augusta store on a supply train, which became known as the Tea and Sugar Train, and operated once a week. Water was carted out to sites and dams constructed. The drilled water was unsuitable for humans, so methods were needed to treat the water. So all of those sort of obstacles are depicted in the photographs. We've got lots of pictures of work camps, lots of pictures of some issues with flooding, especially they had to contend with. There's heavy flooding in Forest in 1930, makes it into many of the photographs. Obviously a big problem for the workers themselves, who had to try and rebuild the railway where flooding had occurred, but also in the 1930s floods, a bit of a problem if you happen to be on the train as well. So lots of photographs of passengers being sort of rescued from the train in Forest in 1930. Lots of other damage to tracks in various locations as well. This photo shows men often slept in tents while they were constructing the line. This photo is an interesting message: last station, dead finish. And as the photographs from 1917, I'm presuming that signals the sort of end of the building of the Trans-Australian. yeah, as I say, lots of photos depicting. This one's actually from the Central Australian Railway, but depicting the tents or the sort of temporary huts that construction workers um, lived in. This one illustrates a sort of innovative solution that they came up with, which was a construction camp on rails. So it was actually one of the, or several of the cars, the train, and that meant that they didn't have to keep sort of, erecting mobile camps and then taking them down. It was just more efficient to have it as part of the train. Um, this construction train had like a dining room as well, and various other sort of facilities, such as a hospital car. It's just a photograph of inside the hospital car on the Trans-Australian. Um, I suppose integral to the construction was not just a sort of labour of the people who worked there, but also the reliance on animals as a form of transport. Um, so lots and lots of camels, especially. So camels were well established as a form of transport within um, outback Australia previously, but they were certainly very heavily utilised in terms of transport for the building of the Trans-Australian Railway and for the other railways. So they transport food, water, and various materials. Lots of photographs with that man on this camel to the right is Andrew Fisher. Prime Minister. Uh, Surveying the work that was going on in 1915. Just a couple of more photographs of camel trains working across the Nullarbor. Horses were used heavily. They were used to draw tumbling tommies, which was the apparatus used to excavate line and dams. So they were particularly used for that purpose. These also feature heavily in the photographs. Whoops. I'm just going to sort of move along quite quickly through the rest of the slides. Working on the line is a major theme that you'll find. Lots and lots of occupations were involved in, I suppose, in building the line, in maintaining the line, and keeping the railways running. So there's some obvious ones, obviously like locomotive drivers, fettlers. Who worked on maintaining the track, and maintenance engineers or workers in terms of fixing locomotives and various other parts of equipment. But the whole range of people, like obviously people operating the signals, people loading freight trains and supplies onto trains, people working in Port Augusta, photographs of the workshop that existed at Port Augusta, and in the kitchens, in the laundry, Port Augusta. So all of these occupations, and certainly Port Augusta as our sort of hub of the Commonwealth Railways, had a lot of these sort of support occupations and roles based there, and that's where the store was located as well, and stores that supplies were sent out. And laboratory technicians as well, testing various components, I suppose, of the railways, just to ensure that they were meeting standards. As part of this collection, and a few of the later albums, I suppose, in those series relate to the promotion of the railways as a sort of tourism activity, or a facilitator of tourism. Certainly opened up parts of Australia that were a lot harder to get to before. So you get a sense of that. You get a sense of how in the 30s then there was a whole sort of development of various sort of safaris or sort of trips, tours that were established that were really made possible by the fact that you could get to these places by train. Um, so photographs relating to that. Also a real sense of how life on board, if you like, evolved, and many of these are actually promotional photographs from the 40s and 50s. But you get a sense of what life was like on board. You certainly get lots of photographs of people playing the piano and singing, looking like they're having a fantastic time, and being served various, morning teas. And different elements, I suppose, that were developed. The observation saloon. This is an interesting one because it really looks, rather than just staring out the back of the train and actually watching the track sort of disappear, it's actually been painted on. So I'm not sure what that's all about. And in the 50s, the 60s and 70s, this is a development of the theaterette car as well. Living on the line is another theme. So you get, I've mentioned the tea and sugar train before. So that started off as a train that's the construction workers along the line, but it became integral really to maintaining communications and supplies to the communities that sprang up along the line. So lots of photos that you really get a sense from photographs of how important the tea and sugar train was. Meeting those sort of once a week trains in these remote locations and getting a week. So lots of photographs relating to that. Tea and sugar train actually went, and it also had the bay van, quite important. So that was always well received. And Father Christmas, I think in the 50s and 60s, Father Christmas would also visit on the tea and sugar train. So that actually kept going until 1996, I think, but it's no longer. I'll just quickly go through these. These are all showing you different aspects of life, I suppose, Commonwealth Railways. So we had the social activities and the accommodation that was provided. That's in Port Augusta. I suppose just to finish, we're actually, I should say, we're actually developing some of these stories and I suppose insights into an exhibition that will be running next year in Adelaide in 2024. And I suppose one of the things we're struck by is, just to finish on really, is just how some of these places, these photographs really sort of depict a sort of lost world, if you like. They sort of depict the rise of the importance and the construction of the railway and how these communities did spring up along the line and were very necessary for the maintenance of the railway. But as time has gone on, as technology has evolved, less and less need for there to be railway workers in each of these points along the line. So somewhere like Cook, for instance, we've got lots of photographs, lots of files about Cook, the establishment of a school and a hospital there. There was really quite, there's a decent sized community there for many years in the 20s, 30s, 40s. We've got stories about how POWs during World War II were stationed there to continue the sort of work needed out of Cook while other people were off serving in the war. But you get a sense, I think now there's only something like 4 people who actually live in Cook. So it's very much, some of these places are very much ghost towns that really are only stopped at for tourist purposes, and photographs really give you that sense. We've got accommodation, that's a railway cottages in Cook, and the Commonwealth Railways band at Cook as well, so from the 1920s, but much of this is no longer there. And probably went a little bit on a little bit longer than I should have done. But hopefully that just gives you a taste of what we've got. Didn't have too much time to go into any detail, but just give you a sense of a range of photographs that are now available from the work we've been doing. As I say, there is an exhibition coming up, and yeah, I just get in touch really to either online or in person if you need a bit more information about how to search for these